Hello everyone, this is Robert and this is my brand new Prusa XL 2-tool head 3D printer. This just showed up a couple days ago, got assembled, and when I got the pre-order notice from this, I noticed that there was very few videos on YouTube, almost none, so I kind of had a hard time deciding. I ended up deciding to pull the trigger and get it, and what I wanted to do in this video and subsequent videos is kind of give those people that still have pre-orders a little bit more information so you can either cancel it or go through with the pre-order. At this moment, I don't really know what the right way to go is. It works, it's here, it's physically a thing, but I want to give you a little bit more information that so you know what you're getting into. So please feel free to use the chapters to skip around. I'm going to cover everything basically from getting it to unboxing it, kind of little things that you should know, and then maybe getting into kind of what you need to do for that first print. So let's go ahead and get started. So whenever I do kind of a product overview, or you could call it product review, I always try and approach it as if you're just trying to do some research and figure out if you want to buy it or not. I'm just trying to give you the information that I have since the thing is right here in front of me. Particularly for the Prusa, I've got nothing invested in this. I mean, I bought this, they don't do sponsorship, there's no affiliate links, I'm not gonna get anything out of this, so I'm just kind of sharing the information with you as I learn it from building this and putting it together and running it through all of its paces, so keep that in mind. I think the best place to start is why I bought this. There's a lot on the market, and when this came out, or was announced 2 years ago, because it was November 2 years ago, 2021, when I actually placed the pre-order the day it was announced, it was pretty cool. But then the Bamboo came out and a couple other things came out, and it's less compelling, you could say. So the reason that I ended up going through with the pre-order is, one, the size. This thing is massive. I'm looking at this on video and it doesn't do it justice. It's quite large. I mean, this build plate alone, just look at that. The build plate is, I'll get that on there later. The build plate is huge. You have a lot more area. The other thing that really intrigued me about this is the multiple tool heads. I do like the concept of something like the AMS from the Bamboo, to where you can mix different filaments, but that's not for me. I don't want to print 2 different colors PLA. That does nothing for me. I don't do cosmetic prints, I do functional prints. So I want to mix different materials. I want to do soluble supports. I want to do like carbon fiber with TPU. I want to do complex things where different materials are together. And with the AMS from Bamboo, you can't do abrasive, well, you're not supposed to do abrasives. You can't do TPU. So you can't do any of the fun stuff. And so I do have a Bamboo. I do have an AMS, and it's not for me. I do not like the Bamboo. Type your comments right now, but I really do not like the Bamboo, and I even got that thing for free. So what I like about the what I like about the XL is the size. I do like that it's semi-enclosed. They're going to come out with some kind of enclosure later. That's actually a positive to me. I don't do a lot of ABS or things like that. I know some people will, and the lack of an enclosure is going to be a negative. For me, it's nice. Even doing a couple test prints on this, it's amazing to actually be able to reach in and see the thing. On an enclosed printer, you're kind of really hard to get in there. So I like the form factor of this. And quite frankly, after having the Bamboo and a few other printers through here, I'm really looking to go forward back to the reliability of just having a Prusa. The Mark III's that I have, and I used to have a Mini, those were my favorite printers I've ever had, because I click the button and walk away and it comes out and it's done. And I went like, I don't know, a year without a single failure or hiccup. The Bamboo, I've ordered parts for it twice now. I've had it for like 6 months. I've had to replace things, I've had to service it, and I've had a lot of failures. And it's just not that reliable. So I want to go back to a tool that I don't have to maintain. I have a lot of tools out in the shop, and this isn't my only tool that I own. I don't want to do preventative maintenance all the time. I don't want to swap out parts and troubleshoot it. I just want it to work. So I'm hoping the XL gets me back to that. So that's why I'm doing it, is the multiple tool heads that allow you to do multiple different materials, the large form factor, and hopefully getting back to that Prusa simplicity, to where you can just click, go, and then wait, and it's done, and you don't have to worry about it. So that being said, let's get into the unboxing and what it takes to set this up. I got these semi-assembled, so I'll kind of go over what the assembly looks like for this and if it's worth the $500 to you. So before we get into the assembly and the unboxing, let's talk about price, because the assembled and non-assembled, there's a $500 difference between them, so why not talk about the actual price of this thing? This ended up costing about $2,800. The printer itself is about $2,500 for the 2-tool head. I think it's what, $2,000 for just a single tool head, an extra $500 for an additional, so $2,500, and then you have $200 shipping on top of that, and then I had about $100 worth of import duties into the US, so it was about $2,800 to my door as you see it. So that's something definitely to consider. It's on the higher end or the highest end of the consumer level printers, and you start getting into that kind of commercial industrial territory. There's a lot of competition when you start looking at Ultimaker, MakerBot, I think I'm thinking Raise 3D, Sigma. When you start looking at those, that's a whole nother category. So it sits on the very, very low end of that, probably not even in that category, but definitely on the very top end of the consumer level printer. So definitely something to take into mind. But I did want to point out that you're going to add about $300 extra when you factor in shipping and the import duties. Okay, so you're going to get this thing, and it's going to be about a 70-pound box. It was like 69 pounds and change, which I think is like 31 kilograms. So it's a relatively large box. Everything is extremely well packaged. And right off the bat, from doing my research and looking online, I found that a lot of people were actually having some issues with the fully assembled because they're putting a lot of weight. Prusa is putting a lot of weight on the bed, and they had some issues with it bowing in the middle. It comes with a massive tub of gummies, and that was actually on the print bed, and with rough handling and shipping, which is going to happen when you ship it halfway around the world, they're having some bending on the build plate. I will say, having bought the kit version of this, I cannot see any significant shipping damage happening. It was packaged extremely well. Everything was kind of isolated in its own spot. The extruders were kind of in their own box. Everything was really well packaged to where there's not going to be an issue with that. As for the actual assembly, I would say you're looking between 4 and 6 hours. That's exactly what I found online, and it took me about 5 hours, so I think it's pretty much dead on. I had a nice dedicated space. I was doing some filming with it, whatever, but 4 to 6 hours is a really good estimate. If you're going to do 2 of these, I'd say you can probably go, I don't know, 3 hours a piece. Once you kind of learn how it all goes together, it's a lot simpler. If you've ever built anything from Prusa before, or if you have any experience with them, you know that their instructions are very, very good. But sometimes it over-explains something. Like I think the first 1 or 2 steps, it was basically just like, attach this piece. But they focus so much on orienting it correctly and getting the right fasteners and making sure that, oh, the holes line up. I guess some people are just going to kind of jam it in there, tighten it down, and then be like, oh, why is it wonky? So there's a lot of that stuff to where I was trying to figure out why they were over-explaining something, and it turns out that it was very, very simple. So there's a lot of stuff like that. Ultimately, you basically have 4 steps. You kind of have the main structure, then you have putting on the Core XY, then some of the electronics, and then final tuning. And as you're seeing in these time-lapse videos, it's all very, very straightforward. As long as you have a large enough work area to put everything together, and it actually goes pretty simple. I have nearly 5 hours worth of assembly footage, and I'm not going to make you guys sit through all of it, but I do feel compelled to kind of explain more about the assembly process. The only thing that I really ran into was that there's definitely different versions of the hardware, and seeing as this is still a new product, you know, pre-orders are still shipping out. There's still a lot of pre-orders that haven't shipped yet. That's not too surprising, but I noticed in one of the early steps, like on the LCD, for example, there's several different grounding methods, and mine really wasn't mentioned. So when I was kind of going through it, mine looked a little bit different than the photos. So my cable routing ended up being different, and I ended up having to like redo a couple steps because I just kind of didn't really look closely enough. But there's a lot of little stuff like that. I think as a whole, the instructions are exceedingly good, better than most, but up to Prusa standards, it's not as good as what they're used to when the product is fully mature. And this is one of the first times where I noticed in this product that it felt a little bit rushed. The documentation isn't as polished as it should be for them. There was a couple version A, version B, and version C's to where you might have one of these three, and they kind of didn't address that until much later, and they could have addressed it much sooner. So overall, it wasn't bad, but definitely if you're getting one of these as a pre-order fulfillment, know that there might be some inconsistencies in the assembly, and it's probably a good idea to get yourself a little bit familiar with the parts ahead of time, read through the instructions and see if anything looks wonky, because you might go down the road of building something slightly wrong. But in no case did I ever feel like I was breaking something or doing something irreversible. It was just, oh, my part looks a little bit different than that. Let me flip through the pages. Oh, okay, yeah, it's installed later. So nothing really big. So since I have a bit of a captive audience right now, I do want to say a message to Prusa. If you guys are watching this video, I doubt you are, but if you are, please reconsider your wire management. It's not bad by any means, but you never give the user enough room. You never give me enough space. All your covers and all your little things are very clever, but they're very tight, and it's really difficult to fit all those wires in these really small spaces. And I think the problem that Prusa runs into with this stuff is if I was building 10 of these, on the 10th one, I wouldn't have that comment. If I'm building one of them, I still haven't figured out the perfect way to push all the wires into the channel and, you know, the order that I do everything. They're pretty good at explaining that to you, but it's kind of more muscle memory than anything. So once you do 10 of these or 20 of these or 30 of these, oh yeah, plenty of room, totally fine. And the pieces you have are great. But for the hobbyist, putting one of these together, it's just a needlessly frustrating step. And the wire maintenance or wire management on every Prusa product I've ever had has always been the worst aspect of it. So just throwing that out there. So overall, the whole assembly went off without a hitch. I'd say it's kind of split into 75% is physically assembling it, and then another 25%, if you're budgeting your time, another 25% is just kind of calibrating it and homing out the tool heads and setting the offsets, all of that good stuff. And this is the first time where I kind of got tripped up and had to go back to the manual, and I thought I was going to have an issue, went to the computer Googling it, and it turns out that I was just kind of doing it wrong or thinking about it wrong. I didn't understand what they were expecting from me. So you have these two tool heads and they have a fixed location in the back. What it needs to do is the, I'm going to call it the receiver, the carrier, whatever it is, the thing that carries the tool heads around, it has to know exactly where they're located so that when it goes to switch from one to the other, it knows exactly where they're physically located. And in the little wizard that runs you through on the screen, it was saying like basically just line it up and manually lock it in place. And so you basically have to take the physical carrier and just move it into the tool head, lock it in place, and then it kind of knows where it is. So you're kind of like learning it in a way, and that one kind of got to me. But interesting process. The wizard is always very good with Prusa. It runs you through every single little step, runs through all the diagnostics. But I ran into an issue with that, and it exited out of the wizard, and I had to reinitiate it, but everything was fine after that. I just wasn't sure what it was expecting me to do. So far in the whole calibration and setup, nothing is really fiddly. It's all straightforward. Once you know what it's asking of you, everything is really straightforward. It's not like you have to, turn some little screw, try it, turn it again. It's all just like run through this process, then tighten the bolts down, nice and easy. So not a lot of like adjusting going on. If you're at all familiar with like IDEX printer, independent dual extruders, or any kind of dual extruder printers, you need to set an offset between the two tool heads. They're in different locations and are not always going to grab exactly the same, things like that. So the way that Prusa does is actually quite interesting. Underneath this bed, on the underneath side, under the spring sheet, there's a little post that you can screw in, and because each one of the extruders has a load cell system, you actually just go through a wizard and it probes on multiple different points. It basically probes the height and then all the way around that little pin, and that will determine the offset. So it takes some time, you know, like, I don't know, 15 minutes, something like that, but it is completely hands-off. The machine does everything, and that is how it adjusts its offset. I haven't done any multiple material prints just yet to see how good that offset is, but that is how it's done, and it's a pretty slick process, and it takes a lot of the user error out of it. So after about 4 to 6 hours of opening the box, you're going to get to this point where the printer is calibrated and ready to use. I'm currently on print head 1. I can go down here to pick 2, and it will go ahead and home. It always does home when it's idle, but as you see, when I go straight to the other print head, it'll just grab it. But you can get to this point to where it's very reliably working and everything's calibrated and you're ready to go. So it goes back, picks it up. Simple as that. And then we go back to the first tool. Nice and simple. It's one of those things that I always like about Prusa's. Everything is pretty straightforward, works the way it is, not a lot of fanfare around it. The other cool thing about this is it's relatively quiet. I was actually kind of surprised with how quiet this is. We'll print something here towards the end, and it is pretty darn quiet. You can have this in your environment. The Bamboo X1 Carbon is extremely loud. I have it in my office, and I am wanting to get it out of my office into the shop because it is just way too loud, especially with PLA, because since it's enclosed, it needs to constantly vent out that enclosure to where it doesn't overheat. So something to think about. The menu system, everything else is pretty typical Prusa. It's not fancy. There's nothing, you know, weird about it. It's just straightforward. It doesn't have the touchscreen. It doesn't have the nice big thing like some of the other printers have. But quite frankly, I prefer this. I don't really want to interact with my printer a lot. I want to hit print and go, and those adjustments and those settings just need to be in a normal, sane place. And that is exactly what this is. It does have the web interface. I'll get into that maybe in a different video. It's not the fancy. It doesn't have the app. It doesn't have a webcam. It doesn't have all those things that, you know, some of the newer printers have. But I never use that stuff anyway. This is me personally speaking. I just hit print, wait till it's done, and then get my part. I don't like to mess around with it. I just like it to actually make stuff. So yeah, that's what it takes to kind of get the thing up and running. Let's kind of discuss some other things. Let's talk about speed and maybe some of the things that Prusa didn't deliver on. So I don't think we can talk about the XL without talking about some of the things that it was kind of promising that it doesn't have, and also now the landscape of the competition has changed. Like I mentioned earlier, this doesn't have a webcam, it doesn't have an enclosure, it doesn't have HEPA filtration. There's a lot of things that it doesn't have that it maybe should have at $2,500 or $2,800. And one of the big things is input shaping. If you're not familiar, input shaping kind of sorta takes accelerometer readings from a head and uses that to tune out the vibrations and all of those fun things that happen when you're moving at very fast accelerations. I'm glossing over this, but input shaping is a new hot thing. It's what the Bamboo uses and a lot of the other Core XY printers are using so that they can get very high speed. You have input shaping, which is the motion side of things, but then you also have the high flow extruder, which allows you to actually push out the filament fast enough to move along with the motion system. So there's a combination of various things, but the XL was supposed to ship with input shaping, which is supposed to allow it to print a lot faster. You have this massive printer, you need to be able to print relatively fast or else things are just going to take like a week. For instance, this is the bottom piece of one of the speakers that I built recently. And believe it or not, this actually came close to maxing out the build plates on the Bamboo. I think I can do like 5 of these on the XL, which is kind of crazy. I went ahead and sliced this in Bamboo, and Bamboo says that this is going to be about 8.5 hours. I sliced it on the XL, 8.5 hours, almost the exact same time. Couple little caveats though. This has a 0.6 millimeter nozzle, whereas the Bamboo has a 0.4 millimeter nozzle. So you're kind of cheating. You're using a slightly bigger nozzle, and I was slicing it with a 0.3 millimeter layer height, which honestly for this part would be perfectly fine. If you're doing high detail, you might want a 0.4 millimeter nozzle or a smaller layer height. But I'm just kind of giving you a bit of a comparison that even without the full input shaping implementation, this part right here, which is, you know, this is a part that I'm making, this is a perfect use case for me, this part was coming out to the exact same as the bamboo, and that was surprising. So once they fully implement input shaping, maybe there's even more significant gains to be had. And I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but CNC Kitchen actually had a really good video on high-speed printing, and basically you need to be able to melt the plastic and get it out of the nozzle. Moving is really cool. Moving fast, that's awesome. But I've noticed this with my bamboo, is if you go at the really fast speeds, you get that matte finish on it. That's because it's not fully melting the material, and I've noticed that you don't really have good layer adhesion if you go really, really fast, because it just can't quite keep up with the melting. So I'm curious to see what the XL can do. Frame of reference, I want to say that the Prusa Mark III's, no input shaping, no high speed, good old classic, was something like over a day. So it was about 3 times slower than what the XL or the bamboo would do. So just kind of interesting things to keep in mind. This isn't slow. I was kind of worried when I got this that it would be like Mark III speeds, but it is absolutely not. It is faster, and it is leveraging the larger diameter nozzle for pushing out more material. So something to keep in mind. So I've covered a lot of topics in this video, and I think I'm going to try and wrap it up and then we'll print something. But I don't think we can talk about the XL without talking about the load cell extruder. In short, this has no adjustments for the Z offset. Ever since I got my very first 3D printer, that's been the bane of my existence, is getting that offset just right, because it can be 1/10 of a millimeter, 1/100th of a millimeter just off. And to get that absolutely perfect across a large area like the XL is going to be very, very, very tricky. There is no adjustment whatsoever. I haven't done any bed leveling with this. There is no bed leveling. It just figures it out, which is amazing. The actual nozzle has a load cell on it, so it can actually detect the pressure. They claim that using the load cell, they can do spaghetti detection. They can do, you know, if the part breaks free, they're basically detecting how much pressure is on that nozzle when it's pushing out the filament. Is it touching the part? Is it extruding into free air? Apparently they can detect these things, and it also uses it to actually detect the bed. So all of these things are really interesting. I did one quick test print before, you know, I started filming this video, and it seems to work. The first layer is better than anything I've ever gotten for the bamboo with all of its LiDAR stuff, and it's on the level of what a very, very well-tuned Mark III looks like. So I think that's kind of the selling feature for me, is the fact that you can swap nozzles, swap build plates, do all that stuff, and not have to ever worry about Z offset ever again. That's pretty much the big selling feature, and this becomes more and more important when you start talking about such a large build plate. It's really hard to get that perfectly flat, so you might as well compensate to some degree, and having the load cell compensate or adjust for it is kind of the way to go. So that's kind of my last 2 cents. In the future videos, please let me know what you want to talk about, what you want to know. I'm probably going to cover some of the Wi-Fi stuff a little bit, since I've always used Octoprint on all of my printers. Getting rid of Octoprint and just kind of connecting directly to the printer is something that really entices me. I've heard some issues with the Wi-Fi, but I didn't know that this also has Ethernet on the back. They don't really talk about that, and it's not really even mentioned in the manual, but this actually does have Ethernet. So if you have Ethernet, you can just do like Ethernet to an access point and be fine if the Wi-Fi is flaky, so something to keep in mind. But that's pretty much all I'm gonna cover for this video. I'm just gonna print something relatively flat, show you what the first layer looks like. We're not gonna get too complicated yet. I still need to learn all of the multiple material head switching stuff. We'll cover that in future videos, but for right now, I just want to show you uncalibrated, set up, put together, filament loaded, hit go, what it ends up doing. So thanks for watching. We'll probably come back and I'll talk about the first layer, but anyway, thanks for watching, and let's see how this thing does in the first layer test. So I'm not printing anything really fun. This is just one of the bottom pieces for my speakers, doing 0.3 to layer height. Basic PLA, but it's a relatively flat piece, so it'll give us an idea of the bottom layer. So yeah. So it finished and the top surface looks good. Let's pop it off. And there is the bottom. So first layer looks really, really good. So I don't know, I have some high hopes for this. I mean that, geez, that is really nice. So yeah, stay tuned. Post in the comments if there's other stuff that you want to see, anything that you're particularly interested in, and thanks again for watching.